Recording is started. Welcome, everybody. We'll wait just another minute or two for our attendees to finish logging in here. Thank you all for joining us. And just as a reminder for those that have just recently logged on, you are in listen-only mode. We cannot see you or hear you. And the rest of the attendees cannot see or hear you. They can't see the attendee list. If you have a question or comment or need to reach us, there's the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Just click that and then type a message and I will see it. All right. I think most of the folks that RSVP'd to me are on the webinar. So I think we can go ahead and get started. I will hand it over to Chris and Andrew. I think most of you on the call know Chris and Andrew, but I'll hand it over to them and they can introduce themselves to you all.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. So introducing myself, my name is Chris Mallon. I'm a certified financial planner along with Andrew here at Pennsylvania Capital Management. I started here back in May of 2018. And Andrew and I both work directly with, I'd say, almost all of the 150 plus clients here at Pennsylvania Capital, and I'll let Andrew introduce himself as well.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you kindly, Leslie. Just like Chris, I am a certified financial planner as well. I started with PCM in July of 2016 as an intern from Drexel. And when I graduated Drexel in June of 2017, I joined PCM full time.
Yeah, awesome. So really today is what we're focusing on is financial planning 101 and investing 101. We really want to make this kind of be the foundational part of a series going forward that Andrew and I will be hosting. I don't know, we haven't worked out if we're going to do something every week, every month, maybe every 2 weeks. Maybe we'll do 10 in a week, we'll see. But going forward, before we dive into all these different financial planning tactics that are out there, like 529 plans, different estate planning techniques, we wanted to kind of get the bases set. We want to get the table set before we kind of dive into everything. And when we start, we're trying to figure out the best way to kind of, show that, express that. And it's really this nice little chart here that we found, the hierarchy of financial needs. It looks very similar to something you might have seen in the past, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, covering, food, water, shelter, all that, up to, I think, the very top of the pyramids, like self-actualization or something. So really that, but switch over to more of a financial and investing focus, because really before we can even get to a lot of the fun, creative, complex solutions that are out there, you have to have the basics done. You have to have the foundation. And that's what a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll touch on each of these in more detail as we work through, starting first with cash flow and basic needs. It doesn't matter if you have the best estate planning, the best tax planner, CPA out there. If your business succession plan is great, if your income is not covering your expenses, it all falls apart. Everything will crumble. And then building off on top of that, you have your financial safety, have to make sure your liabilities are covered with proper amounts of insurance. And then also an emergency fund, things happen, you lose your job, you could get sick, a spouse could lose a job, you need extra money to cover situations when those happen. Moving on up the tower here, accumulating wealth. This is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. This is where you start really building out your investment portfolios. You figure out, okay, how do I fill up the various buckets that are out there? Do I add more to the 401k? Do I, get the full match there? Do I fill up the HSA, take advantage of the tax savings there? Do I fill up the, kids 529 plans down the line? Those are the different, various ways in there. And then financial freedom, that will come more after, okay, you're filling up all the buckets, you're accumulating wealth, you're paying off your house, you're paying down your student loans, you're getting out there. It's like, okay, what really can I do on top of this? That's where things get a little more interesting. There's different retirement savings techniques that are out there to particular business owners. Do we want to cover our bases with some long-term care insurance, different things like that. And then finally, top of the tower, legacy planning. So say you have all those bases covered, you don't have to worry about cash flow, you have enough in your savings to cover anything that comes up. You're filling up all the different, wealth accumulation buckets. You've done all the fun financial freedom things as well. What do I want to do next? What's my legacy going to look like for future generations in my family? That's where estate planning comes in. One thing we'll talk about later with estate planning that Andrew and I disagree a little bit with this particular tower is there's some estate planning things that should really be coming in kind of right around the cash flow and basic needs and financial safety, kind of the, some boxes to check there. Beyond that, when you get to certain levels of wealth, estate planning becomes very important to make sure that you're not overpaying in taxes and to make sure that your legacy is protected going forward. So now how the presentation is going to go, we're basically going to start from the bottom up. And so the next slide here we're going to talk about is cash flow. So here, I'm going to kick it over to Andrew, but just to lay the groundwork, it's going to be a sample budget and using $100,000 salary for somebody who lives in the Philadelphia metro, suburban, tri-state area.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And just as Chris said, it's a sample budget, and I wouldn't really more want to say it's more to give you parameters on what would be ideal spending goals, on what should be meant for the basics, rent, housing, necessities. What's a good rule of thumb to say for retirement? What should be allocated towards debt payments? And then what most people forget about, you always have to pay Uncle Sam. The first thing that we're going to start with would be your housing expense, because with the bottom of the foundation, we always want to start with having a good house, a roof over our heads. So, and a good ideal rule of thumb for based on a sample on a budget would be allocating about 28% of your pre-tax income towards housing. That could be rent. It also could be your mortgage payments. In the financial planning world, what we define mortgage payment as PITI, P-I-T-I, which stands for your principal, your interest payment. That's your mortgage payment at its core. And then there's also the homeowner's insurance and the real estate taxes.
And Andrew, if I can interject for a second, when you
Sure.
say 28%, so what if I, if I share an apartment with some roommates and I'm really only spending 20% of my budget on housing costs, that just leaves the extra 8 for saving more. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So I would say it's not gospel. It's more a good rule of thumb to have when you're going out to set a sample budget. And it really depends geographically. If you're living in New York or Los Angeles or parts of the state or parts of the country that are very expensive, your housing payment might not be 28% of your income. It might be 30 or 32. That's okay. It's really where you are regionally. If you're in other parts of the country, or as like Leslie mentioned, you're splitting the rent with a friend, another roommate, a sibling, that's great. You can allocate that extra percentage that you're saving towards other parts of the sample budget. It could go to retirement. It could go towards your necessities if you want to plan for a vacation or something like that, or do something fun with it, or it could go towards debt payments.
And then if you go over the 28%, then you're just going to have to shrink one of your other budget areas to
Exactly. So that might mean trimming some of the fun stuff you like to do. Some of the fun stuff might mean saving a little bit less for retirement in the short term until you build up a strong enough income to be able to kind of bring that more back down to 28% or less.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up income, Andrew, because that's one thing that I'm kind of derailing us slightly here. But in a lot of financial planning budgets, everything focuses on the expense side, but cash flow has two sides. It's the income and the expenses. And since we're actually coming near the end of the year here, a lot of you are probably getting, year-end reviews. Heck, ours are coming up in a, couple of weeks. One thing that a lot of people, I think, overlook are their year-end reviews. Those can have massive impacts on your financial future. Spending some people will prepare for their year-end review for 5, 10, 15 minutes. I think it's worth spending several hours, almost more so on that than even looking back at how much you spent the year before. Because if you can get an extra 5% raise, 6% raise, and then that compounds over time, that can really, that just helps on so many levels. It can earn you income over what your expenses are. You can contribute more to retirement. It's kind of a positive feedback loop going forward. Sorry to digress.
Exactly. Once you get that raise, I would say it's nice to splurge, but focus that raise first on paying on yourself first. That could be either trimming down some debt. If your debt is higher, if you have a lot of student loans, you have a lot of credit card debt, car payment, car lease, etc. Or as Leslie mentioned, if you're living in a more higher cost of living area, it could go towards housing. But pay yourself first and cover your basics before you want to splurge and go on that extra vacation.
Right. Want to be conscious of the lifestyle creep, which is very possible.
So I'd say to get us back on track, the next section would be necessities. That'd be about 20% of a good rule of thumb for your sample budget. What's that? We'll cover food, groceries, utilities, the cable bill, those types of daily, monthly expenses that we all incur. Next would be the retirement savings bucket. A good rule of thumb is to save 15%. And we said before, 15% is a good target to start. If you can do more, that's fantastic. If you can do 20, that's even better. If you can't do 15 and you only can do 10, or in our other series, when we talk about investing, you can really only contribute up to what your employer may give you for a 401k match. That's okay too. It's just really starting with getting money invested and starting to save. It builds good, healthy habits for the future.
Yeah. Zero is the enemy. You don't want to have zero in there. You want to have something.
And for retirement buckets, depending upon your employer, if you work for a private company, that could be a 401k. If you work for a nonprofit or a government, that could be a 403b or a 457 plan. And then outside of work, there's also other retirement vehicles, IRAs, individual retirement accounts, or Roth IRAs. The big difference between Roth and a regular IRA is with Roth IRAs, you pay the taxes now and the money grows completely tax-free for perpetuity. That's fantastic for a 40+ year working career. With pre-tax, you're taking the deduction now, and the government is going to require you to take the money out right now at age 72 in the future and pay taxes later. So it's more paying taxes now versus paying taxes in the future. That's the main difference between Roth versus regular IRAs. Next would be about 8% would be debt payments. That's car, credit cards, student loans. Just like Chris said, when it comes towards getting a raise, immediately not think of let's pay ourselves first. Instead of maybe wanting to upgrade the car, get out of the lease, buy a new car. Think about paying yourself first or paying down existing debt that you might have, because I know a lot of us had a lot of student debt that we want to get paid down, fairly quickly.
Yeah, I'd say of all the different sleeves here, the one that's going to vary the most, person to person, will probably be the debt sleeve here, because you come out of school with no student debts, and your credit cards are really, I guess, if you're carrying balance. If you are, if that's just your necessities and you're paying it every month, that doesn't necessarily count as a debt payment. But that's going to be the one that varies the most, person to person, and the one that we can is very important to control. If that keeps getting bigger and bigger, unsustainable debt can really wreck the plan. But you don't need to be zero debt either. A little bit of debt's good. Again, just said student loan, good debt, mortgage debt, good debt, as long as you can sustain it.
And then last but not least, we can't forget about paying Uncle Sam. Taxes, this is also something that's going to vary by region. For the budget we used for this, in this case, it would include federal taxes, paying Pennsylvania. This individual that makes $100,000 a year in this scenario is a regular W-2 wage employee. So they would pay FICA taxes. as well as if they live in PA, you might have to pay some any applicable local taxes. Say you live in a local municipality, or the city of Philadelphia, for example, has a city local wage tax as well too. But depending upon where you are, that could be higher or lower. If you live in New York or California, you're going to pay a little bit higher state taxes. If you live in Texas, Florida, or Nevada, or a couple other states, you're not going to pay any state taxes, and that savings you can reallocate to other parts of your budget.
Moving on here to financial safety, working our way up the stack here. Fun little piggy bank with an umbrella. So starting up next here, what's an emergency fund? If we remember back from the pyramid, this was kind of next on the list. Once the cash flow is all in order, we need to make sure that there's enough money set aside in case an emergency happens, right? You need to have it to cover, basically, I'd say two main things. The reason to have it is job loss. That's why we use kind of time frames as rules of thumb. So it's like, how much should I have saved? Anywhere between 3 months is kind of the riskiest end. 12 months probably being the most conservative end. It's really a flexible number. One thing Andrew and I always ask, new clients as far as, okay, how much cash do you have set aside? How much does that, in terms of months, how many months do you have covered? Hopefully, and a lot of time the answer is, at least a year. It's like, great, okay, then you could probably afford to invest more. If the opposite happens, before saying, put more in the market, it's like, okay, let's get the emergency fund, let's get the piggy bank filled up, because the last thing you want is all of a sudden, someone loses a job, there's a disability, the car gets totaled, and then you need to, tap other funds that are supposed to be for their future and bring it over to money that you need right now, because that kind of can derail things. And so where should this money go? It should be in, online bank account, high yield savings accounts. There's various ones out there now. High yield savings accounts, kind of an oxymoron these days where rates are, but it is worthwhile if you have the extra, funds in your savings to look around. You can get maybe an extra, percent here or there on your savings versus getting 0% in a checking account. But it should be readily available. It should be something you can get within 24 to 48 hours. Not something that takes a long time to access. And then not stocks or Bitcoin. And I know Andrew's got a fun little anecdotal story here.
I have a great little story with this. So we had a client of ours. He's relatively a little bit older than Chris and I, and he had his emergency fund. And he said, Andrew, I want to put the bank is paying me nothing, 0.01. What would be a good idea for me to put my emergency fund in? And this was, for perspective, December of 2019, so pre-COVID. So I said, okay. He had accounts with Vanguard as well as having accounts with PCM. So I said, okay, what's paying right now relatively high interest, relatively high, air quotes, would be just a Vanguard money market fund, which was paying around 1% at the time. So we left it at that. When I chatted with him 5 months later in May of 2020, we spoke again. I said, how's your emergency fund now? Because with COVID, we've been going around with clients and saying, did you is your emergency fund bolstered? He said, well, I want to talk to you about that. My emergency fund kind of lost a lot of money. And I said, how was that so? You put it in didn't you put in the money market fund? He goes, no, we decided to put it in the Vanguard 500 fund because it was paying a higher rate of return. And I said, well, the Vanguard 500 fund is the stock market. And the market had just dropped 30%, had just dropped 30% in March and was starting to recover, but his principal, he put it back in January. He still had not recovered. I said, you're probably down about 15 to 20% on your emergency fund. He goes, yeah, how did you know? I said, well, because that's stocks. With stocks, it's about having a longer time horizon. Anytime we invest in the market, we want to have a time horizon of at least five to 7 years. Because with investing in stocks, that's the average cycle of the stock market, from expansion to peak, back to contraction to recession, and then it just goes in a circle. With an emergency fund, we want you to have that money liquid in case something happens tomorrow. You have 100% access to the principal in 24 hours notice. He got lucky. The market recovered by August. And I said, as soon as you're back to even, or plus or minus $100, move it back into the money market fund. And that's what he did. So the moral of the story, emergency funds, have it in a liquid, highly available bank account, money market, not in the stock market or other types of risk assets. For example, would be Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, because you don't want volatility for your emergency fund.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was a situation where I don't think he needed the money out of the emergency fund, but you don't want to be in a situation where you are forced selling your investments in your stocks and things like that, and taking huge losses to cover an immediate expense, where if you had that money set aside, you'd be good. You want that, like Andrew said, long-term on the investing side, so you're not forced pulling money out and then getting that's how you end up losing, right? All right, I think we're on here. So we're kind of on that second level of the pyramid still here, saying what wrecks the plan. So this is a question that Andrew and I asked in a bunch of different ways. When we get a new client or prospect, we're looking at the whole piece. And we're like, okay, what kind of derails this? Is their spending too high? Do they not have enough insurance? Do they, not have enough in the emergency fund? So we already hit on this, so I'll kind of go through this quickly. Not enough in emergency savings. And then the other big thing that we always check before we even really jump into all the investing stuff as well is not having liabilities adequately covered. So this is going to be, start off the top. I'll go through this list quickly and then we'll kind of work backwards in more detail. Health insurance. Health insurance bills. Health bills are I believe, don't quote me perfectly, but I think I'm right, the leading cause of bankruptcies in the United States. You get sick and are in the hospital for a long period of time. Those bills are hundreds of thousands of dollars that can, cripple you financially forever without, having health insurance that would pay for it. Disability insurance. This one I'd say is often overlooked versus life insurance, which we'll touch on next, mainly because a lot of people think, okay, if I predeceased my spouse, then they're losing my income. Yes, while very important, it is also a lot less likely that happens versus getting disabled and not being able to work at your full capacity at the very least. So it's often looked over. That. Life insurance, again, what wrecks the plan? Say we have a young couple that comes and meets with us. They just had their first kid, they have a house, and they're like, okay, Chris, I want to start investing. I'm like, okay, what's your life insurance picture look like? You have a lot of liabilities here. And they'll have, maybe 100,000 they'll get through work. It'll be one-time salary. It's like, okay, what do you owe on your house? $300,000. Okay. And then you just had, your first kid here. You plan on them going to college? Yes. Okay. Do you have, a pot of money set aside for college yet? No. Okay. So you have some liabilities down the road and current ones that need to be covered in case one of the spouses predeceased the other, because you're kind of planning on both spouses, if both spouses are working, to, contribute towards those expenses. So definitely one spouse predeceasing the other is something that can wreck a financial plan. Okay. And then finally, property and casualty. This is the homeowners, renters insurance, the cars, and then umbrella. And we can go into more details of those too. Andrew, do you want to touch on health insurance at all, or disability? I know you had some tax stuff for disability.
I would say with insurance, because Chris covered the four, I'll call it the four big ones: health, disability, life, your property and casualty. The main thing with insurance, it comes down to risk retention. If you feel more comfortable retaining the risk and if there's higher bills, you'll have lower premiums. If you feel more comfortable retaining the risk, that could be having a higher health insurance deductible. That could be having That could be having a disability insurance policy that has a longer elimination period. That could be having an auto insurance or homeowners insurance policy that has a higher out-of-pocket deductible before the company would start paying. If you feel uncomfortable with that and would rather have the insurance company retain more of the risk, you're going to have you're going to have higher premiums. It's all about having that happy balance between what you feel, the eat well, sleep well, feeling comfortable at night, and also budgetary for cash flow as well. For health insurance, I'd say to start off with give a quick highlight on health insurance. The two main plans that we see a lot of clients work with today are we'll call it the old traditional PPO plans, which had lower deductibles, usually co-payments to go to the doctor or for prescriptions or go to the hospital. Those are more expensive than what we see now, which are your high deductible healthcare plans. High deductible healthcare plans have a much higher in their case in point, their name, have a much higher out-of-pocket deductible before the insurance company will start paying. However, the employee will have a much lower premium. So if you're a person that's relatively very young, very healthy, you don't go to the doctor a lot, a high deductible plan might be better for you because you can save money on the premiums. As you get a little bit older, have a family, want to make sure you have more coverage for your family, the PPO plan might make more sense later in the future. For disability insurance, as Chris mentioned, disability insurance really is broken down in two different buckets. There's short term, which would usually cover you if you have an accident, you break a leg, can't work, hurt your back, can't work for a couple weeks.
Yeah, I would say short term, to put some time framers on it, I'd say would be less than 90 days out of work. Right.
I think some of them go. I think some of them go to about 2 years. I think that's the max you can get on a short term.
Right.
But long-term disability policies would be you have a catastrophic injury that you're not going to recover. So that would pay you until you're in your 60s. It could pay you even until your full retirement age, which right now for all of us is age 67. Those would be the short-term versus long-term disability policies. Most of these policies are offered by your employer, and there's kind of, as Chris mentioned, if they're not offered by your employer, you can go to a insurance company and buy these policies on your own and have individual policies.
Yeah, I'd say typically long-term, at least in most cases, not all, that is usually covered by the employer. Not usually, again, if they offer benefits. Long-term is a lot cheaper than short-term insurance because you have to wait. It's usually 90 days plus before the insurance company would start paying anything. So it's less, so it's cheaper for the employer. That's usually tacked on there. Short-term, I'd say, is pretty rarely included as an employee benefit for free. Usually you have to buy into it. So keep that in mind as well. A lot of this stuff will kind of be in your employee HR packets to kind of see what the options are that are out there.
Mm-hmm. And with these type of benefits, we hope you never have to use them. That's what we want to say first. We hope you never have to use it. But if you do, if your employer pays the premiums for you, the monthly benefits would become taxable to you if your employer is paying for it. That's because the employer is deducting it as a business expense. If you as an individual are paying for it either out of your own salary deferral, or you have an individual policy separately outside of work that you are writing a check for it, that would be tax-free to you because you are paying the premiums.
For life insurance, I'll talk about kind of the differences between term, whole, and universal. I'd say again, we're kind of looking at, a new client, friends ask me, what do I need insurance-wise? Term is the big Band-Aid, the big cheap Band-Aid that we like to see. Now, how much insurance? Rules of thumb are, I'd say at a bare minimum, kind of have your liabilities covered, whether it be mortgages, student loan debt that's out there, if there's any other debt you have, and then maybe college as well. Those are kind of the very specific ways to go about it. A lot of different insurance salespeople will just say 10 times your income, no matter what it is. Now that might not be necessary. It might be depending on how much, like I said before, how much risk you want to retain. And then term, like the name is, has a defined term limit. Let's say it's a 30-year term policy. At the end of those 30 years, you can keep the policy, but the premiums will probably go up about, I don't know, 100 times a month. Yeah. So for example, my just got a life insurance policy. It's 50 odd bucks a month now. I think if I take it through that 31st year, it would probably go up to $1,000 a month or something outrageous. So something to keep in mind for those. Whole life is permanent, a permanent insurance policy. So that will last from, now, no matter when you pass, as long as you pay the premiums, since, we eventually will all die. Those policies cost a lot more because there is a 100% certainty that the life insurance company is going to have to pay out the benefit. This is more of, I'd say whole life and universal are more so for if we're getting up to that like top piece of the pyramid we're looking at, more towards legacy planning, estate planning, almost more of I want to leave my heirs X, Y, or Z no matter what. That can be a good savings vehicle for that. If you don't want to take the risk in investing that in, stocks, bonds, and the market. And then, Andrew, I know you were talking about earlier, we were talking offline about maybe auto policy, some of the stuff there. There's some interesting numbers.
I'd say first I'll start with the homeowners versus the renters, because homeowners is definitely something you want to have. You want to have a homeowners policy. Usually a good rule of thumb would be, I believe, to start with an HO5 policy, and make sure, but again, have the deductible that you feel comfortable with, and you can get a deductible that's $1,000 deductible. If you feel like you don't want to pay that much, have a lower premium or a higher premium. If you want a much higher deductible, you can go as high as $2,500. But it's good to have this insurance in case there's a fire in your home, a hurricane blows through and takes off your roof, a tree falls on your house. Because I know, especially in our area, in our neck of the woods, when we had those storms back in August, we had many clients that were bailing water out of their basements, lost part of their roof, trees fell on parts of the property. That's where these policies would really come in handy. The renter's insurance, I know renter's insurance, it's kind of do I really need it? Because in most cases, if anything should happen, if you're in an apartment, if the walls would cave in, the property management company, the apartment owner would be responsible, but your stuff would not be covered in case something like that would happen, or there'd be a leak in your apartment, or there would be a fire. That's where the renter's insurance would come in and reimburse you if you lost any damages to any of your items that you had inside your apartment.
I have a funny story for that. In a year after college in Columbia, South Carolina, where we moved into a brand new apartment complex, me and my friends, and thank goodness, not our side of the building, while they were painting the other side, one of the painters had a heat gun next to a smoke alarm or something and set off all the sprinklers on the other side of the building. So we're looking out our balcony window across like the courtyard, and there are hundreds of gallons of water just pouring out of the balconies there. And this is mostly like college age housing. And I'd say a lot of, like, ever since that apartment, anyone I've gone into, you've had to have renter's insurance. When you sign the lease, they require you have something. But for whatever reason, I guess this apartment didn't, or it's a bunch of college kids. They don't really think about it. So all their stuff was gone. And then I am assuming they try to go after the property owner, but the property owner doesn't have to, buy you new laptops or clothes or televisions or anything, even though they were, at fault. So that's why, I just made me think of that.
Yeah, definitely. Because when I was at Drexel, something similar happened. A kid lit a cigarette, set off on the floor of one of the housing
sprinklers.
Yeah, sprinklers. Everyone was running out crazy.
Yeah. Don't want that to happen to you.
Exactly. You do not, because they had to move all the kids during, and it was finals, of course, making everything even more. You had to move all your stuff out.
Yeah.
Touching real quickly on auto insurance. So for auto insurance, there's usually four components. There's liability insurance, which I would think pretty much all states require in order to drive a car. You can also have collision insurance, which would be if your car hits something and you want to get the car fixed. If you hit a standing object, there's also comprehensive insurance, which is if your car kind of has a tree fall on it, hail damage, it gets caught in a fire, it gets caught in a flood. That would pay for it. I like to call it the act of God insurance. That's really comprehensive. Or if you hit if you hit an animal. I know Chris has a story about that.
Yeah, my wife just hit a deer a couple weeks ago, and the comprehensive took care of that one. So there you go.
Yeah,
it happens.
Yeah, and then there's also the last one that's usually included is the uninsured motorist. That's usually a very high another part of the insurance your policy as well. That's if an uninsured motorist would hit you, you have coverage as well to get your car fixed, to get your car repaired and all the like. But you really only have to have liability. If you have a relatively new car, very expensive car, you might want to have the liability, have the collision, have the comprehensive. You can adjust your premium with your deductibles, whether you want it to be $500, $1,000, $1,500. But if you have let's say, an older car that is 15 years old, that's worth $2,000, you may just want to have the liability and not so much have the comprehensive or have the collision. Because if the car is only worth $2,000 and it gets totaled, it's $2,000. It's the insurance company would just automatically just pay you out. It might not be worth the extra premium. A good rule of thumb for a standard policy for liability is 100, 300, 100. That's $100,000 of bodily injury per person, $300,000 per accident, and then $100,000 for property damage per accident. If you're a high net worth individual, you might want to bump that up to 250, 500, 100, or 250, 500, 250. It's really just taking those same three components and boosting up the dollar amounts. And then touching last would be, once your net worth really starts to get over $1 million and more, you then want to have that additional layer of protection, which would be the umbrella policy. The umbrella policy is extra liability insurance in excess of what your homeowners or auto insurance liability would pay. And it's relatively dirt cheap to get an extra $1 million or $2 million or even $5 or $10 million for, I think what would you say, Chris? It's a few hundred dollars for maybe $1 million umbrella policy.
Yeah. It's not. Yeah. It's
just to have that extra peace of mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have, I'll throw something in for the umbrella policy. Years ago, and I was just a couple years out of college, my dad recommended to me that I get an umbrella policy.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't have a house or anything yet. I didn't have that much assets. And I was like, Dad, why would I possibly need that? And he said that, and now my dad was a lawyer, so he had that bent to him. But he said, if you do, you hit somebody, somebody gets hurt in your apartment or something, and they sue you, your umbrella policy can cover that lawsuit. So so I got it. I got an umbrella policy. I've had it for a long time now, and I think it's $200 a year for $1 million policy.
Exactly.
It's a peace of mind for me, really.
It's super cheap to have that peace of mind. And I'd say one last thing to touch on it before we transition to, I believe it's investing is next. With your property and casualty insurance, homeowners, renters, auto, umbrella, you can shop around because insurance, as Irvin and Steve always say, it's a commodity. And you don't have to, you can shop around from carrier to carrier. If you want to save a little bit of money, you can, a lot of the carriers, Allstates, the State Farms, the Cincinnatis, the Prudentials, they will allow you to bundle. And if you have all three with one company, you can get some really nice discounts and save you some more money.
For sure. Awesome. Moving on. Accumulating wealth. So again, working our way up that pretty pyramid here. We've got, cash flows covering our income and expenses. We got the emergency funds funded. We got enough insurance. Now we're getting on to the kind of next phase here, and it's growing the money. So this happens in various different ways. One of the things we touched upon earlier with the budget, the 15% going to retirement, this would be, potentially how that retirement money could grow. This is an example of dollar cost averaging, which means adding in, on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, at the very least, on, regularly timed increments, $10,000 a year, and then what that money can grow to over the course of a 40-year, working career. Most of us, are going to retire in our 60s, hopefully, maybe later. So, if you're working longer, this could grow further. So the different lines here, you'll see down at the bottom, the dark one here is a 6% rate of return. Dark orange here, 7%, gray 8. We have it working up to a 10% per year return. One thing you will notice is that you don't see a lot of the benefits of, investing every year, dollar cost averaging, compound interest, really until about 20 odd or so years. And then you'll really start seeing the growth really get exponential. A lot of that just has to do with the fact that the deposits early on are going to make up a bulk of the balance that's in there. And then all of a sudden, compound interest starts working in your favor, and that starts rapidly increasing. Yes, I know Andrew's going to talk more about that. So one number I'll throw out, even if you're getting a 6% rate of return over the next 40 years, as a reference point, over the last 10 years, the S&P 500 has been averaging a little bit more than 10% a year. If you've been more balanced, you've probably gotten closer to that 7 to 9%, which can over 40 years get you over, $3 million if you're, sticking with the program for your whole life, which is quite a bit of money. It should be able to last you through retirement. Anything else from that, Andrew?
Sure. Thank you, Chris. I would say that with this slide and these 5 line charts, what we really wanted to more illustrate the most was in all 5 scenarios, hypothetical scenarios, because in each scenario, you're not going to earn 6% a year for 40 years. You're not going to get 10% a year for 40 years.
It won't be this clean. That would be great.
It will not be this clean. It's going to be like this. It's going to be like a stop. It's going to go up and down and around.
You'll be up 12. You'll be down 3. You'll be up 4. You'll be down 1.
But over time, it'll be a nice upward ride. In all 5 scenarios, you're only contributing over an entire 40-year working career, $400,000. But I'd say the main thing that it's what we're trying to emphasize with this is by putting the money in and funding the accounts when they're in the beginning and keep doing it and methodically doing it every year. By the time you get to in your late 40s, early 50s, you're going to have built up a large balance, mainly due to compounding, which I know, Chris, you like to call it the 8th wonder of the world. Mm-hmm. And the power of dollar cost averaging and compound interest. If you get 10% a year, $400,000 of your money can turn into $4.5 million, almost $4.5 million. So that's $4 million of growth. If you get a lesser rate of return, even 6%, you have around 1.5 million. So about $1.1 million of growth. If you get somewhere in between, you'll be in that range between 3.5 and 2 million. But it's really just trying to emphasize, if you start early and continue to do it, you're going to have a nice reward when it's time to retire. Now, there's many different methods to dollar cost average. The first one as we highlighted before, in retirement savings, putting it in your 401k, 403b, Roth IRA, regular IRA, or other type of government 457 plan. That's one bucket that you can do it. If you have those buckets, if you say, hey, and we get this a lot, Andrew, I filled up my 401k, I've maxed out the Roth IRA, What do I do next? We then move to the next bucket, which is a after-tax brokerage account. That can be opened up at Schwab. You can open it, and that could be an individual account for a single person. It can be a joint account for a married couple. And it could be at a custodian like a Charles Schwab, a Fidelity, a Vanguard. It could be any type of basic custodian that you can just put the money in after tax. It would grow, and it would still grow. It would still grow over time, and you can still have an extra bucket. So you'll have retirement money and taxable savings to go. So you have two buckets for retirement.
Well said. I'm going to move us on a little bit quicker. This is going to be one of the things that we're touching on more lightly this time, and we'll dive into more details about, investing kind of in later series here, because it's too large of a topic to kind of try to include in the, this foundational part one here. So I'm going to move us on here to the planning your legacy. So if we remember back from the pyramid, this is the one thing that Andrew and I kind of disagree with on there is some of the estate planning stuff. That should kind of be down more towards the middle. Now, estate planning is a massive space. There's, the basics, which is kind of what our list here in a moment is going to be covering. And then that can vary in complexity to different charitable remainder trusts or different things like that, life insurance trusts, different things that can really fit various needs depending on what the family's goals are, net worths are, and things like that. So really when it comes to estate planning early on in a foundational level is to get the documents in order and have at the bare minimum kind of this list here. You want to have a will. What do you want your money going to whom? Have a durable power of attorney, medical and financial. So that will cover, if you say you bang your head, can't make financial decisions anymore, and you need somebody to, do that for you, have somebody set aside for that. Same kind of thing for medical, guardianship and conservatorship. Probably the hardest thing on here to decide is who would look after your children. If you have children, who would look after them in terms of a guardian, making kind of day-to-day life decisions, and then conservatorship would be the financial side. They don't necessarily have to be the same person. So again, that's probably the hardest one to, come up with. And in our experience with various clients, that's kind of been the one that they've struggled with the most. And then choosing beneficiaries for retirement accounts and life insurance policies. It's really easy when you're setting up your 401k or an IRA to kind of just gloss over that, hit that little button that says skip this for now. When that happens, that means your retirement accounts, if you were to pass, would go into probate court, and then the state would have the wonderful time of deciding where the money goes. Now, each state has their own rules. They're not horrible rules, but most of us, I imagine, wouldn't want the government deciding who gets what money out of which accounts and when, which is mostly covered by the will at the start.
Or deciding who gets your kids.
Yeah. Yes. So while this is the hardest one to decide, arguably almost the most important, because I don't think, I think I, maybe myself, but when I have kids one day, I don't know if I want the state deciding where they were to go if I'm predeceased now.
And then it's also good, always good to have for when it comes to the durable power of attorneys, both medical and financial, and the guardianship and conservatorships, to have a primary person and then have a backup. That would be in the event that if the primary person, that person should unexpectedly pass away, or they no longer would be able to take on the duty, either take care of your kids or make a financial or medical decision on your behalf. You have a backup person that can come in and take over, and that you feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing I'll mention on, don't all these legal documents, aren't they expensive? I'd say yes and no. It's probably more expensive to not have them, especially depending on the complexity of your family and how your finances are situated. It can be very expensive if that's not squared away. We had an example with a client who never changed the beneficiary on his one insurance policy from his ex-wife, and he passed and his ex-wife got $500,000, and the new spouse was not too happy about that. However, there's nothing that can be done. So those are the kinds of things that, while can seem expensive, tedious, painstaking to go through, can have huge impacts on a financial plan.
And Chris, we have a question from one of our attendees asking how often do you recommend a will to be updated?
That's a good question. I don't know if time is, well, a few different ways to look at it. Time-wise, I'd say 5 to 10 years, only because that's usually when a lot of things can change during 5 to 10 years. If it's every year, I'd say be way too frequent. Every other year, probably. What'd you say?
Your estate attorney would make a lot more money off you.
Right. Yeah. Your estate attorney will love you if you're changing every year, but don't need to do that. I'd say 5 years is good to at least take a look at it to see if anything's changed. I'd say 10 years, almost a guarantee that things need to be adjusted, because we'll have some clients who haven't changed will in 10, 15 years, and their kids were, 10 years old, 15 years old when it was written, and now their kids are in their 30s and have launched themselves. So their desires have changed. That's a good rule of thumb year-wise. Or if you say you had a sudden, windfall of money, say you get a large inheritance, say, big liquidity event, you sell a company, then it's a good time to revisit and kind of look at everything again. So 2 ways to look at it. I'd say at a minimum, probably every 10 years. And then if there's a huge life change, to look at it again.
Yeah, and other life-changing events, that could be getting married. On the flip side, that could be getting divorced too. Birth of a child, birth of a grandchild, or in the event of a spouse passes away. It's good to have your estate plan looked at for those, reviewed for those.
Yeah, those can be the triggers. Great question. All right. I think we're on to that's really our last content slide, I guess, for this here. And we've come up right about, 50 odd minutes here. So good time on our part. What's next? So this is kind of our first in what we are calling, maybe in a corny way, the solution series of different financial solutions out there. So everything today was, I'd say, incredibly, kind of the basics, the boxes that need to be checked before we can start introducing these other things that are out there. So I know down the line, we're going to want to talk about paying for education. So that'd be like 529 plans. What's the best way to do that? There's different ways besides 529 plans that have kind of fallen out of favor, but good to cover those. Andrew probably knows more about Medicare plan selection than the people who work at the Medicare offices. So I know he will lead the charge on one of those. Getting a mortgage. Housing market is crazy right now. We have a lot of clients, a lot of children of clients who are searching for mortgages. So we're able to kind of help them navigate those waters. We can talk about what we look for when evaluating mortgages, estate planning strategies. So what we touched on a moment ago, I wouldn't say were strategies. That's kind of more of this is the foundation.
Basic concepts. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The bare necessities there. The strategies would be more so once we're getting into higher levels of wealth, different ways to, different vehicles out there that can help, kind of avoid estate taxes. Charitable giving. Many of us are charitably inclined. What's the most efficient way to do that? Can dive into those. Investing wise, portfolio allocation fundamentals, kind of if you're building out a portfolio. I know we touched on investing very briefly, but that's a whole series in and of itself. And then we can also tie in how to evaluate a portfolio manager, something that Andrew and I and everybody at PCM, we do on a daily basis. So it'd be good to put something together there to kind of show you guys. Lift the curtain a little bit.
Yes, and if you guys have any suggestions on future topics for us to cover, please reach out. If you've got some topic that you're really interested in deep diving into, please reach out and we'll put together a webinar for it. Because if you're curious about it, I'm sure they're curious about it too. So please reach out.
Yeah, I think that's all we have here. Are there any other questions? Here's our number, and then I think everyone here has our emails, but we'll follow up after this as well, so we'll be able to get direct emails. Nancy and our team put the slides together, and I didn't want to mess it up and try and put our emails in here.
And we will send out the slides to everyone too, so they can have these and review again in the future. Any other final questions before we end? All right, thank you all.
Back in the job.
Happy to have you with us this afternoon, and have a great evening, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Take care.
Yeah.